Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. A brittle twig's retort under an unseen weight fractured the forest's deep hush, anchoring us mid-stride. Hours we'd trekked, steeped in the profound solitude only untamed places offer, but that solitary crack retuned the world. Huddled close, straining our senses against the encroaching twilight, we couldn't fathom how swiftly our pilgrimage into peace would devolve into a frantic scramble for existence against predators far more cunning than any beast of claw or fang. They call me Leo. The wilderness has been my sanctuary, my proving ground for most of my years. This venture, though, was consecrated to kinship, shared with Ilara and Ronan, my staunchest companions. Months we'd dreamt of it, drawn by the allure of an Appalachian tract whispered to be remote, untouched, far from trodden trails. The siren song of pristine nature, of absolute seclusion, had beckoned. Had we grasped what truly nested in those ancient woods, we might never have answered. Our camp materialized in a sun-dappled clearing beside a brook that murmured secrets over smooth stones, a scene torn from some forgotten pastoral idyll. 2 days unfolded in blessed rhythm, excursions into the green, the patient art of fishing, evenings haloed by campfire glow filled with shared histories and easy laughter. We'd unearthed a pocket paradise, it seemed. On the third dawn, ambition spurred us deeper. The trees pressed closer, a denser weave of bark and leaf. The undergrowth thickened, clutching at our boots. An exhilaration surged, a feeling of trespass on land unvisited by human feet for generations. That's when the dissonance reached us. Voices carried on the breeze. Initially, a flicker of annoyance. So much for splendid isolation, but drawing nearer, the timbre shifted. This wasn't the cheerful chatter of fellow wanderers. The tones were jagged, laced with aggression. We sank behind the immense girth of a fallen hemlock, peering through a filigree of ferns. The sight coagulated the blood in my veins. Within a small, trampled space stood several men, heavily armed, clad in stained, mismatched camouflage. They clustered around a rough-hewn table, jabbing fingers at an unfurled map. "The stash is here," one snarled, the sound scraping like rust. "Move it before the feds close the net." Ilara's fingers dug into my arm, her eyes vast pools of terror. We had blundered into a viper's nest. Slowly, with excruciating care, we began our retreat. But fate, it seems, possesses a cruel whimsy. Ronan's boot snagged a treacherous root, sending him staggering backward. The sharp clatter of breaking branches exploded in the stillness like a gunshot. Heads snapped up. Eyes, hard and suspicious, raked the surrounding woods. "Who's there?" a voice barked, sharp with menace. "Show yourselves." We fled. Strategy dissolved. Stealth evaporated. Pure, unthinking adrenaline ignited our limbs as we crashed through the resisting foliage, branches lashing our faces like angry whips. Behind, shouts erupted, the unmistakable sounds of pursuit gaining ground. "Split!" Ronan gasped between ragged breaths. "Harder! To track!" A part of me screamed to stay united, a threefold cord against the dark, but the desperate logic was undeniable. A frantic shared nod, and we fractured, diverging into the green labyrinth. Downhill I plunged, seeking the remembered solace of the stream. Water, a liquid veil to swallow my trail. The forest blurred into streaks of green and brown, my pulse a frantic drum against my eardrums. Footfalls pounded behind me, drawing nearer. Panic, cold and suffocating, clawed at my throat, but I wrestled it down. Focus was survival. I burst from the tree line onto the stream bank, slick stones nearly betraying my footing. Without pause, I plunged into the frigid embrace of the current, the shock stealing my breath. Downstream, I waded, forcing swift, silent passage through the numbing cold. After an eternity compressed into mere minutes, I hauled my shivering body from the water, seeking refuge in a shadowed alcove carved by an overhang of rock. I pressed myself into the damp earth, fighting to quiet the rasp of my breathing. The splash of disturbed water downstream froze me anew. Someone was hunting in the stream. I held my breath until my lungs burned as a figure moved past my hiding place, so achingly close I could almost feel the displaced air. One of the men from the clearing, rifle held at the ready. For a heart-stopping instant, he hesitated near the mouth of my small cave. Certainty clenched me. He'd heard, he knew. Any second, his eyes would pierce the shadows. But then, inexplicably, he moved on, continuing his search downstream. I remained coiled in that cramped, dripping hollow until my muscles screamed and the light filtering through the leaves began to fail. Only then did I risk emergence. The woods had fallen unnervingly silent, the usual chorus of birds and unseen creatures conspicuously absent. The need to find Alara and Ronan warred with the chilling certainty of danger. Where had they gone? Had they escaped? Night transformed the familiar woods into an alien landscape. Every shadow pulsed with potential threat. Every rustle of leaves whispered of pursuit. I moved with the caution of a hunted thing, senses stretched taut. Hope had begun to fray when I heard it, a soft whistle, barely disturbing the air. A simple tune agreed upon years ago, our signal for lost trails. My heart leaped, Alara or Ronan. Following the fragile sound, I advanced with painstaking care. It led me toward a dense thicket of mountain laurel. As I neared, a hand emerged from the tangled leaves, beckoning me inward. Alara. She looked ravaged, scratched, smeared with dirt, exhaustion etched deep around her eyes. But alive. We clung to each other in silence, the relief too profound for words. "Ronan?" I whispered, finally pulling back. She shook her head, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. I thought, with you. We endured a sleepless night within that thorny sanctuary, taking turns at watch. Every snap of a distant twig, every sigh of the wind through the pines sent jolts of adrenaline through us. Dawn painted the sky in bruised colors, bringing the cold certainty that we had to move, find Ronan, escape. But the hunters were still out there, weaving their invisible net through the trees. We moved like wraiths, searching for any sign. The forest no longer a place of wonder, but a deadly maze where annihilation might lurk behind any trunk. It was mid-morning when the shot came, a single flat crack that echoed, sending birds erupting from the canopy in frantic flight. Alara and I locked eyes, the same dreadful premonition mirrored in our gaze. Ronan. We pushed toward the sound, caution battling the desperate imperative to reach our friend. Cresting a small rise, we saw them, the armed group, gathered in a sunlit pocket below, and there, forced to his knees in the center, was Ronan. My spirit plummeted. His face was a mask of bruises and dried blood, hands bound tight behind him. The apparent leader stood over him, pistol held with casual menace. One last time, the man's voice ground out, devoid of inflection. "Where are your friends?" Ronan spat a gout of blood onto the mossy earth. "Go find your own damn hell." The man raised his weapon. Time stopped. Without conscious thought, my hand closed around a heavy, smooth stone. I hurled it with all my strength, aiming not at them, but high into the dense woods on the far side of the clearing. The distraction landed. As heads swiveled toward the unexpected noise, Ilara and I exploded from cover. I slammed into the leader, a tangle of limbs and desperation, sending his pistol skittering into the undergrowth. Simultaneously, Ilara darted toward Ronan, knife flashing to sever his bonds. Chaos bloomed. I fought with a ferocity born of terror and love, fueled by the primal need to shield my friends. Ilara freed Ronan, who, despite his injuries, surged into the melee. Somehow, amidst the frantic struggle, the confusion, we created an opening. We ran as if propelled by the very fear that threatened to consume us, feet barely skimming the forest floor. Behind us, enraged shouts and the sporadic crack of gunfire pursued us, but we never looked back. We ran until our lungs burned like acid and our legs turned to water. When we finally collapsed, gasping, unable to take another step, we found ourselves ejected from the wilderness onto the edge of something startlingly mundane. A weathered strip of asphalt, a road. The sight, so ordinary, so symbolic of safety, threatened to shatter my composure. We flagged down the first vehicle, a sedan driven by an elderly couple whose initial apprehension melted before the raw desperation etched onto our wild faces, our torn clothes, our frantic pleas. They drove us, swaddled in blankets and shock, to the nearest town, directly to the sanctuary of the police station. The story spilled out, the armed men, the overheard plans, the terrifying chase through the woods. They listened, their professional calm a stark contrast to our fractured narrative, and the weight of their response became apparent as state troopers and federal agents were summoned. In the sterile quiet of a local hospital recovering, we learned the full measure of our ordeal. The men were part of a violent extremist cell, entrenched in the region for months. Our accidental intrusion had unraveled their operation, leading to arrests and the dismantling of their network. They called us heroes. It felt like nothing of the sort. Just three friends who sought adventure and stumbled into a darkness far deeper than any forest shadow. That passage through the wilderness remade us in ways still unfolding. We had faced mortality together, glimpsed the chilling capacity for violence that can fester in the human heart. Yet, in that crucible, we also unearthed a resilience within ourselves, a tensile strength in the bonds between us previously unknown. The wild still calls to me, its deep peace and rugged beauty an enduring solace. But now I walk beneath its canopy with a different awareness, forever cognizant that even in places of profound beauty, danger can coil unseen. And I carry the lesson learned in those terrifying hours. Sometimes the most lethal predators in the woods are the ones who walk on two legs. A percussive drumming commenced on the shingles above. The rain, insistent and torrential. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Tremors ran through my hands. Days I'd waited for this deluge, for the spectral reappearance of the sodden impressions. The enigma etched onto my attic floor, defying every attempt at rational explanation. Memory surfaces of the initial encounter, a phantom plink, 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 drawing me upwards towards the cavernous dark of the attic, expecting a mundane roof betrayal. Instead, dust, thick as velvet, bore the impossible signature of bare, wet feet. A trail materialized from the heart of the floorboards, marching with deliberate, oddly spaced steps straight to the dormer window, halting abruptly at the sill. I knelt, swiping with a forgotten rag. The prints, though more delicate than my own, spoke of adulthood. Their hesitant gait whispered of stealth. My eyes scanned rafters, corners, searching for the ingress of water, the logical source. Futile. Moisture existed solely within the confines of those ghostly outlines. The surrounding expanse parched and undisturbed. Sunlight the following morning painted the attic in stripes of gold, revealing nothing. Dust lay smooth, inviolate. The dampness, the prints, utterly vanished. No telltale stains marred the wood. The window frame remained stubbornly intact, mocking my memory. Imagination, I reasoned, grasping at straws. Perhaps I'd tracked something in myself, though the absurdity struck me even then, my feet having been shod the entire night. A week dissolved into dry silence before the heavens opened once more. Midnight found me ascending the attic stairs, flashlight beam trembling in my grip, breath catching high in my chest, muscles coiled tight. I pushed the door inward. They had returned, identical impressions charting the familiar course from floor center to window ledge. My light probed the rafters, swept the shadowed recesses. No leak, no drip. Only the prints wept onto the dusty boards. I traced their path, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, a vice tightening around my temples. Each print a perfect, chilling negative. Touching one, my fingertips came away slick with cold moisture. I swiped them on my trousers, inching toward the window where the trail ceased. Leaning into the blustering dark, rain needled my face. A sudden thump overhead, a dislodged shingle. Pushing my head further into the tempest, my gaze snagged on it. A silhouette against the lesser dark of the storm-racked sky, huddled near the roof's far edge. Shoulders slumped, spine bowed, head canted towards the city's distant, hazy glow. Ice flooded my veins. One hand clenched the sill, the other directed the flashlight's cone. A flicker of motion, impossibly swift, and it shied from the light, dissolving into shadow before form or feature could register. My legs turned to water, my throat constricted. Retreating inside, I lingered, the urge to clamber out, warring with the primal fear of the slick, perilous incline. I secured the window latch, already fastened, a useless gesture against the unearthly. How could anything ascend that sheer surface? The gutters, brittle with age, offered no purchase. Backtracking along the footprints yielded nothing new. Sleep offered no refuge that night, haunted by the image of that crooked shape against the storm. Morning light revealed a mundane world. I circled the house, eyes scanning the shingles. Nothing. No trampled earth, no snapped twigs. Upstairs, the attic presented its usual dusty face, devoid of prints or moisture. I swept the floorboards bare, erasing the phantom evidence, yearning for a blank canvas for the next inevitable performance. Time crawled. The question of what festered. Cameras remained a financial impossibility. Cheap sensors felt inadequate against something so elusive. Gray skies became omens, thunder a prelude. A strange cocktail of dread and fascination brewed within me. I needed to confront it, to see the architect of these aqueous tracks. Then, inevitably, the sky bruised. Unleashing its fury late one evening, thunder rattled the window panes where I sat below. A deep inhalation, the familiar ascent, flashlight clutched tight, shoulders hunching defensively. The attic door swung open on a wave of damp, earthy air. The weak overhead bulb flickered to life, illuminating the glistening trail. They waited. I followed each step deliberate. Crouching, I touched a print, icy cold. A knot formed in my gut. Above, a distinct scrape sent a jolt through me. My grip strangled the flashlight. The sound originated directly overhead. Enough. Resolve hardened within me. I wrestled the window latch, heaved the sash open, wedging it with scrap wood. Wind drove curtains of rain inwards. Leaning out, the shingles gleamed slick and treacherous. Bracing myself, I thrust my torso into the deluge, instantly soaked. Rain lashed my face, blinding. A scan left revealed only darkness and wet angles. To the right, there, a nebulous form perched at the roof's apex. The same crooked silhouette, gaze fixed on some unseen horizon. No face discernible, no sound save the storm's roar. Was it even breathing? "Who's there?" The words tore from my throat, thin against the wind's howl. A subtle shift in its posture, nothing more. Another call, swallowed by the rain. Gritting my teeth, I ducked back inside momentarily, swiping at the water streaming down my neck. Answers. I needed them. Pulling on stiff rubber boots and a worn oilskin jacket. From an old trunk, I returned to the breach. Out onto the roof. Balance was a desperate negotiation. My boots skidded on the sodden shingles as I edged towards the peak. Wind buffeting me, rain drumming a deafening tattoo on my hood. Hands quaked. My heart felt poised to shatter my ribs. Closer now, I saw it knelt low, almost reverently touching the roof. It remained facing away. Another shout, lost. Its shoulders hitched, a semblance of respiration, but still, it didn't turn. My legs vibrated with cold and fear. Water seeped into my boots. One more tentative step, my footing vanished. A choked cry escaped me as I slammed onto my knees, palms scraping raw against the abrasive surface. Wincing, I looked up. Empty space. The figure had evaporated. A rustle behind me? I spun, finding only rain-swept shingles. Retreat. The risk was too great. Shivering, numb, I crawled back, hauling my sodden weight through the window, collapsing onto the attic floor, utterly spent and baffled. Daylight brought only confirmation of impossibility. The window securely latched from within. The roof unmarked. Had I dreamt the sodden ascent, the vanishing act? No, the memory was too vivid, the scraped palm too real. The prints had been there. The thing had been there. Next time, I resolved, a heavy armchair would barricade the attic door. A flimsy, desperate notion. A respite of dry weeks followed, a fragile calm that shattered with the first hint of bruised clouds. The familiar surge of adrenaline, the resentment of being a prisoner of anticipation in my own home. I occupied myself with attic chores, sorting through forgotten lives packed in boxes, seeking any overlooked anomaly. Solid floorboards, sound walls, tight window seals. Under a placid sun, I even ventured onto the roof again, meticulously inspecting every square foot. No hidden access, no conceivable perch. The thought, insidious and unwelcome, surfaced. Was it human? I recoiled from the notion, clinging to the hope of a rational terrestrial explanation. And then the clouds gathered once more, unleashing their contents against my window panes as night fell, the familiar tightening in my chest. I bypassed the now pointless armchair, eased open the attic door. Timbers groaned under the wind's assault. Light flickered on, revealing the inevitable, the glistening path. I advanced, halting beside the first print, compared it to my own socked foot, the difference stark. These were narrower, the toes tightly clustered, the heel unnaturally defined. Kneeling, the chill of the water seeped into my fingertips, triggering a tremor in my hand. A low groan emanated from the rafters. I froze, gaze snapping to the window. In the dark glass, my own reflection stared back, distorted. Behind it, a flicker, a presence. I whipped around, nothing but shadows and dust motes dancing in the weak light. My muscles screamed tension, my focus narrowed to a tunnel. Enough. Decision made, I strode to the window, flung it open. Rain spat inwards, head thrust out into the storm. It was there, poised near the roof's ridge, immobile, contemplating the infinite rain-lashed dark, that same posture of intense, hunched stillness. A shout ripped from me, swallowed by the gale. No reaction. A burning need to know surged, overriding fear. To see its face, to hear it speak, to understand the why of the footprints. Out I went, leaving the window gaping. Rain plastered my hair, stung my eyes, tasted metallic on my tongue. My jacket became a second sodden skin. Hands and knees, I crawled across the treacherous slant, heart hammering, arms trembling with exertion. Halfway, I paused, scanning upwards, unmoved. Steeling myself, I crept closer, one last desperate shout into the wind. Silence answered. An attempt to rise was instantly checked by the slickness underfoot. I stayed low, 6 feet away perhaps. Details sharpened. The narrow set of the shoulders, a disturbingly elongated neck beneath the forward canted head. Visible skin on what might be arms held a pallid gleam through the rain and gloom. Still no face. My mouth was desert dry despite the downpour. Abruptly, it unfolded. A fluid, unsettling grace lifted it upright. Its head pivoted just slightly towards me. Did I glimpse 2 obsidian pools reflecting the storm, or was it a trick of the light? Before certainty could dawn, it crouched low and launched itself over the roof's peak. A scrape, a soft thud fading into the rain's static. Scrabbling forward, ignoring the fire in my scraped knees, I reached the ridge. Nothing. The yard below lay vacant, swallowed by darkness and the downpour. Neighboring houses remained dark eyes in the night. No trace. I knelt there, gasping, chest aching, soaked to the bone, knees throbbing. Turning, I crawled back to the sanctuary of the attic, collapsing onto the floorboards in a puddle of rainwater and exhaustion. My gaze fell upon the footprints, still gleaming, leading from nowhere to the window. My mind spun, a frantic engine finding no purchase on logic. Mechanically, I closed the window, mopped at the spreading water with a rag. The prints persisted, dark stains on the wood, until they too were erased. Hours later, silence descended as the storm retreated. The next day dawned ordinary, printless. Yet the house felt altered, permeated by an unease that clung like damp. The memory of its movement, that impossible speed, that traceless vanishing, refused to fade. This house remains my home, and with every forecast predicting rain, the old tension coils tight in my gut. I make the pilgrimage upstairs. The flick of the switch, the sweep of the light. Sometimes the floor remains barren, other times they are there. When they appear, I inevitably go to the window. And often it is there too, the hunched watcher on the roofline. Silent, remote. It never intrudes further than its aqueous signature, never acknowledges my presence beyond that fleeting possible glance. Then it simply ceases to be there. Thoughts of leaving surface, yet remain unacted upon. A persistent, perhaps foolish fragment of me still craves resolution, believes confrontation is possible. But proximity only ever triggers its vanishing. Whether it portends ill, I cannot say. I know only the taut alertness that grips me until the last raindrop falls. A cheap, motion-activated camera now keeps vigil in the attic. Its lens captures only the spontaneous bloom of wet prints on the floorboards, moisture appearing as if from the wood itself. No figure walks into its frame, so I endure the uncertainty. I watch the lowering sky. The first patter on the roof quickens my blood. I climb the stairs, push open the door, cast the flashlight's beam across the floor. The footprints manifest, leading inexorably to the window. Drawn by a compulsion I no longer question, I approach, peer out into the rain-streaked night, and I see it, crouched against the elements, gazing eternally towards the distant city glow. I stand sentinel at my window, it at its perch, until, without warning, it launches itself into nothingness, or dissolves like smoke, leaving me in the echoing solitude with the rhythm of the rain and the inexplicable map of its passage upon my floor. The car's engine coughed, then died, leaving only the sigh of the nearby ocean to fill the silence before the small coastal inn. Hours folded into the stiffness knotting my legs. Bleached white, its paint flaking like sunburnt skin. The building hunched under a single salt-scoured wooden sign near the door. My ambitions were modest. 4 walls, a mattress, perhaps a plate of something warm, followed by the oblivion of deep sleep. Nothing more intricate than that. A short flight of warped wooden steps led to the entrance. Inside, the air hung thick with the ghosts of salted fish and the dry breath of aged upholstery. Behind a narrow, scarred counter stood the proprietor, a man etched by perhaps 50 years of coastal living. A short-sleeved shirt, faded trousers. His attire spoke of function, not form. No welcome softened his features. He inquired after my name, the duration of my intended stay. Just the one night, I offered, possibly 2. The morning would decide. He produced a key, its brass dulled by countless hands, and gestured with his chin towards a constricted staircase ascending into shadow. Questions felt superfluous. Settling in, finding rest, that was the imperative. My worn satchel felt heavy as I climbed. The corridor above was hushed, steeped in the weak amber glow of a single unadorned bulb dangling from the ceiling. My room waited at the corridor's terminus. Within its confines, a bed frame bearing a thin mattress, a diminutive table partnered with a solitary chair, a meager curtain veiling the window, and a warped wooden door promising a cramped bathroom. The linens, though laundered, bore the pallor of long use. Floorboards protested my weight with weary creaks. Dropping the satchel beside the bed, I nudged the window open a fraction. A sky the color of slate pressed down. Beyond a brief margin of sand lay jagged rocks, perpetually washed by the sea's rhythmic exhalations. Distant fishing vessels dotted the horizon like scattered punctuation. The immediate vicinity, the beach itself, appeared utterly deserted. Securing the window, I stretched out on the bed. Sleep felt imminent, yet a hollow insistence from my stomach overruled exhaustion. Descending once more, I found the proprietor, who directed me towards a small alcove off the lobby serving as a dining space. He presented a plate, a fillet of fish, stark white, beside a huddle of boiled potatoes. The fish, though undeniably fresh, offered little to the palate but its own plain essence. He vanished, leaving me to the meal. I ate, drank water, and retreated upstairs. Silence reigned in the hallway. My door stood sentinel at the far end. I turned the key in the lock, extinguished the light. Outside, the ocean's ceaseless murmur filled the darkness. Weariness pulled at me heavy as a shroud. I surrendered, closing my eyes. Hours later, profound darkness greeted my waking senses. No timepiece consulted, yet the dead stillness spoke of the night's deepest ebb. No discernible cause had roused me, only an indistinct disturbance snagging at the edge of consciousness. I lay immobile, listening intently. Wind whispered around the eaves. Waves maintained their steady, percussive rhythm, and then another sound, a faint, shuffling movement from the corridor, not loud but distinct. It evoked the sound of bare feet, wet feet, traversing the wooden floor, a soft, intermittent slap, slap, as if someone padded slowly, deliberately, just beyond my door. I held my breath. The footsteps crept nearer, hesitated directly outside, then ceased. An attempt to dismiss it, to will my muscles into relaxation, proved futile. Then the door itself vibrated, not a forceful rattle, but a slight, tactile tremble. The lock held firm, yet the wood pulsed beneath the unseen pressure. My heart hammered against my ribs. Pushing myself upright, I fixed my gaze on the door, anticipating a recurrence. Seconds stretched into silence. Then, faintly, the quiet tread resumed, receding down the hall until swallowed by the quiet. Slipping from the bed, I pressed my ear to the cool wood. Nothing. With tentative fingers, I turned the lock and eased the door open a mere sliver. The corridor lay empty, bathed in the same weak, yellow light. The floorboards appeared dry, unmarked. No lingering dampness, no visible prints. The air carried only the familiar sense of age and salt. A shrug, more reflexive than convinced, preceded my relocking the door. Unease lingered, a cold counterpoint to my fatigue, but sleep eventually reclaimed me, albeit fitfully. Morning arrived reluctantly, sunlight filtering weakly around the curtain's edges. My neck ached. Dressing quickly, I descended the stairs. The proprietor was present, methodically wiping the counter. I mentioned the nocturnal disturbance, the sounds in the corridor. He offered a non-committal shrug. Perhaps another guest, he suggested vaguely. Were there others? Yes, he conceded. 1 or 2 lodgers. Yet the inn retained its air of profound emptiness. I let the matter drop. The morning dissolved into a solitary walk along the shoreline. Weather-beaten houses stood sentinel, their windows like vacant eyes. A small harbor cradled a few resting fishing boats. The few locals I encountered offered no smiles, no greetings, their gazes sliding past me uninterested in the transient stranger. Reaching a cluster of dark, wave-smoothed rocks, I paused, looking out at the placid expanse of the ocean. Nothing seemed amiss. Hunger eventually drew me back towards the inn. I consumed a simple lunch, bread and cheese from my provisions, within the confines of my room, lacking any desire for further interaction with the proprietor. An old magazine failed to hold my attention. The afternoon stretched, languid and heavy. Departure beckoned, yet the thought of more driving, the profound weariness still settling in my bones, argued for delay. One more solid night's sleep felt essential. I resolved to stay. Dinner was another solitary affair in the small dining area. No other patrons materialized. Silas served fish again, accompanied this time by bread possessing the density of stone. I ate without lingering and retreated to my room. The lock clicked satisfyingly home. I checked the window latch. The ocean's voice was a constant presence. Seating myself on the hard chair, I gazed out at the darkening view. It was then I saw him. A lone figure poised upon the rocks, starkly defined against the fading light. The form was undeniably human, male. He appeared unclothed, or perhaps swathed in something so thin, so dark, it merged with the twilight shadows. He stood utterly motionless, facing my window. Distance obscured his features, yet something glinted where his eyes should be, reflecting the dim light like chips of wet obsidian. The tide was low, leaving the rocks slick and glistening. He remained, an unwavering sentinel. I watched, transfixed, a knot tightening in my neck, a chill prickling my scalp. Briefly, I scanned the surroundings, no other soul in sight. When my gaze returned to the rocks, the figure stood unchanged. Uncertainty warred with a rising dread, too distant for identification, too still for comfort. I pulled the thin curtain decisively closed, attempting to wall off the unsettling image. The floorboards groaned beneath my restless pacing. A leaden weight settled in my gut. Sleep, I decided, was the only refuge. Perhaps sheer exhaustion would grant me passage into unconsciousness. That night, sleep was a fragile, shallow thing. Shortly after midnight, I surfaced again into awareness. The room was utterly silent, save for the omnipresent murmur of the sea. Then the sound returned. Those wet, slapping footfalls in the corridor, heavier this time, imbued with a more palpable weight. I sat bolt upright in bed, straining to hear. Closer, closer they came. They stopped directly outside my door. The knob turned, a metallic scrape in the stillness. Once, twice. Then the door itself shuddered, a solid impact against the frame, straining the lock. Scrambling out of bed, I reached the door, my hand closing over the knob. I felt the vibration resonate through the wood, felt the subtle, yielding pressure from the other side, someone testing the barrier, leaning against it with quiet insistence. "Who's there?" My voice tight and thin. Silence answered. I waited, breath held captive in my chest. The pressure ceased. The rattling stopped. The wet steps retreated, their sound diminishing down the hallway into nothingness. Wrenching the lock open, I flung the door wide, peering frantically left and right. Emptiness greeted me. The lone bulb still cast its weak light. No puddles marred the floor. No footprints betrayed the visitor. Nothing. Slamming the door shut, I twisted the lock and leaned back against the wood. breath coming in ragged gasps. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead. Switching on the bedside lamp, I sank into the chair, eyes fixed on the door, waiting. I remained there, vigilant for what felt like hours. Eventually, the pull of exhaustion became undeniable. Sleep was elusive, but sometime near dawn, it must have claimed me, for I awoke to the weak, gray light of early morning filtering through the curtain. Enough. The decision was immediate, absolute. I would leave this place now. I dressed, packed my satchel with brisk final movements, and descended to the lobby. Silas stood behind his counter, impassive as ever. I announced my departure. He posed no inquiries, simply accepted the payment proffered. Had anyone else, I ventured, reported strange nocturnal occurrences? A familiar shrug. No. Had someone attempted to force entry into my room? He didn't know, he claimed, his own eyes shadowed with weariness. Outside, I carried my bag to the car, stowing it in the trunk, the metallic slam echoing slightly in the quiet morning air. One final glance towards the beach, an involuntary compulsion, and there he was. The figure returned to his perch on the rocks, gazing towards the inn, towards me. The nascent sunlight rendered him clearer now. His skin possessed a peculiar grayish, damp sheen. Those eyes again, catching the light like minuscule, polished pebbles. No discernible features resolved on the smooth plane of his face. His form was lean, utterly devoid of hair, unclothed, just sleek skin the color of wet slate. He stood perfectly still. A tremor ran through my hands as I fumbled for the car keys. Sliding into the driver's seat, I turned the ignition, the engine catching with reassuring potency. The urge to flee, to put miles between myself and this place without a backward glance, was overwhelming. Yet for a paralyzing moment, I felt rooted. I stared through the windshield at the empty street, the shuttered windows of the neighboring houses. Glancing again towards the rocks, I found them empty. The tide had crept higher, submerging the lower stones, leaving only the crown of the largest visible above the swirling water. The figure was gone. I eased the car onto the narrow, poorly maintained road leading out of town. My grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, my arms rigid. A gritty dryness plagued my eyes. Images flooded my mind. The slick sound of unseen feet, the vibrating door, the unmoving shape on the shoreline. A profound sense of wrongness permeated the memories. I forced my attention to the road ahead, navigating the uneven surface, the car jolting over potholes. The engine hummed steadily, a small comfort. I tried to banish the thoughts, push them away. Miles later, a solitary gas pump and a dilapidated storefront marked a brief respite. An old man with vacant eyes presided over the counter inside a cramped space, thick with the smell of rust. I purchased water, gulping it down. The impulse to ask about strange coastal sightings flickered, then died as I registered his utter lack of engagement. It felt pointless. Back in the car, the journey resumed. The coastline scrolled past on my right, the ocean occasionally visible, looking deceptively ordinary. No boats disturbed its surface. No uncanny sounds reached my ears, only the drone of the engine and the rhythmic slap of tires on asphalt. Gradually, a measure of calm returned. My pulse slowed. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. What had I witnessed? Rational explanations flickered. A nocturnal wanderer, perhaps shoeless. perhaps emerging from the sea, a local eccentric guarding his territory from the rocks, wind rattling an old, ill-fitting door, yet the tactile memory of the wood vibrating under my hand, the sensation of deliberate pressure contradicted flimsy logic, those reflecting eyes, the absence of any physical trace, no water, no footprints, the chilling silence that followed the intrusion, the cold dread coiling in my gut. Ultimately, explanation felt less important than distance. Escape was paramount. I craved a larger town, anonymity amongst crowds, a hotel with solid walls and bright, unwavering lights. I wanted the image of that smooth gray form erased from my mind, the sound of those wet steps silenced, the memory of the trembling door banished. The road wound inland, climbing through low hills, past deserted fields and decaying barns. My focus remained locked on the ribbon of asphalt unfurling before me. What lay behind held no appeal. The sky brightened, the sun gaining strength, warming the car's interior. The pervasive scent of the sea began to fade. Another stop, this time at a roadside diner, coffee, a sandwich. The low murmur of other patrons, none of whom spared me a glance. My hands, I noted, were steadier now. My mind felt bruised, weary, but the forward momentum was soothing. Back on the road, the afternoon wore on. Traffic increased. Towns appeared, bustling with the mundane rhythms of daily life. People moved with purpose, oblivious to the stranger passing through. Their indifference was a balm. Fuel was sufficient. The events of the previous nights remained vivid, yet the urge to articulate them, to share the burden, felt absent. What narrative could I possibly construct? Strange sounds, an unnerving figure glimpsed at dusk. A door mysteriously rattled in the dead of night, followed by nothing. The story dissolved into ambiguity, lacking proof, lacking resolution. I realized then that it was mine alone to carry. It was finished. I was moving away, leaving that presence, whatever it was, tethered to that desolate stretch of coast. There would be no return. All I desired was a place to sleep free from that specific suffocating tension, safety, the ability to close my eyes and hear only the commonplace sounds of the world. I did not look back. Dusk was deepening when I finally pulled off the highway, finding a motel at a busy intersection. Functional, anonymous, a welcome contrast to the inn. The clerk processed my check-in with practiced disinterest, handing over a plastic key card. Parking the car, retrieving my satchel, I found my assigned room. It smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant, impersonal and blessedly unremarkable. I secured the deadbolt, flipped on the overhead light, and sat on the edge of the bed listening. No dripping water, no stealthy footsteps, no tremors running through the door. A long, slow breath escaped my lips. Sleep was the goal. Forgetting was the hope. I lay back, switched off the lamp, and waited in the darkness. Nothing intruded. Cars hummed past on the highway outside. A television murmured indistinctly from a nearby room. Muffled voices, distant and harmless. Nothing else. Pulling the thin blanket higher, I consciously relaxed my shoulders. My heartbeat settled into a steady, quiet rhythm. Eventually, sleep came. Hazard lights pulsed, twin wounds of frantic orange bleeding into the rain-slicked obsidian of the highway night. A desolate stretch, miles from anywhere familiar, that I should pull over, guided by some deep-seated instinct to mend, that this impulse would unravel into a terror destined to coil around my memory. Such thoughts were inconceivable then. Midnight had just bled past. The hospital shift, a marathon of sterile urgency, lay behind me. Home, an hour's drive ahead, through a world dissolved by ceaseless rain into shimmering, indistinct shapes. Fatigue gnawed, a dull ache behind my eyes strained by the hypnotic sweep of wipers across glass. Almost there, a silent mantra against the encroaching yawn. Then the stuttering blink on the shoulder. Closer, a shape resolved. Someone small, arms flailing against the downpour. A semaphore of desperation. The weariness dissolved, replaced by the familiar sharp hum of adrenaline, the ingrained reflex of care. I am Alara, after all. Tending is what I do. Without deliberation, I eased the car onto the gravel verge, the tires whispering their wet protest. Parking brake engaged, I peered through the deluge. A woman drenched, hair plastered like dark seaweed to her skull. Everything all right? My voice, amplified slightly by the enclosed space before I opened the door, cut through the rain's drumming. Stepping out, the chill was immediate, invasive. Need some help? Her face, glimpsed in the intermittent flash of the hazards, crumpled inward with sheer relief. Oh, heaven sent, she gasped, voice thin and trembling. The car just quit. Nothing. And my phone's useless out here. I thought I'd be stranded till morning. I moved towards her vehicle, a sedan whose better days were clearly ghosts in its rusted panels. Let's see the engine, I offered, practicality overriding the strangeness of the hour. I'm no mechanic, but sometimes it's simple. As she leaned inside to fumble with the hood release, a different sound sliced through the rain. The low growl of an approaching engine. Headlights swept over us, blindingly bright for a moment, before a pickup truck slowed, pulling in neatly behind my own car. Relief, foolish and premature, washed through me. Company, assistance. The truck door creaked open. A man emerged, broad-shouldered, a silhouette made bulky by a rain-darkened jacket, a baseball cap shadowing his face. Trouble here? His voice was rough gravel, not overtly hostile, yet carrying no warmth. Seems so, I replied, turning back towards the sedan's raised hood. Just died on her. Was about to investigate. His heavy tread crunched on the gravel behind me as I leaned in, squinting into the engine's greasy labyrinth. It was alien territory. A spark plug was as mysterious to me as ancient runes. Then, cold, hard, an undeniable pressure against the nape of my neck. My breath hitched, blood turning to ice water in my veins. The unmistakable, terrifying geometry of a gun barrel. Not a twitch, the man's voice commanded, stripped bare of any prior neutrality. Now pure menace. You make a sound, your brains decorate this engine. I froze, suspended in disbelief. A nightmare, surely, conjured by exhaustion and the hypnotic rain. But the steel biting into my skin was irrefutably real. Okay, he rasped. Slow, stand up, turn, hands where I can see 'em. My limbs obeyed, clumsy marionettes pulled by unseen strings. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. As I turned, the woman, Sylvie, she'd eventually be called, stood beside him. The mask of distress had vanished, replaced by a smile that held no light, only a chilling, predatory amusement. Look what we have here, she purred, her voice laced with mock pity. A little lost lamb trying to play shepherd. How touching. The truth struck with the force of a physical blow. The stalled car, the frantic waving, a performance, a carefully laid snare for precisely the kind of person I was. Please, the word was a threadbare whisper. Take my wallet, whatever cash I have. Just let me go. Corbin, the man, let out a short, brutal laugh. Oh, we'll get your cash, sweetheart. Don't you fret. But this nice ride of yours, that's appealing, and I'm guessing a nurse. He paused, letting the word hang in the damp air. Might have some interesting things back at her place. Fear spiked anew. How? Then I remembered the pale blue scrubs visible beneath my open jacket, my profession worn like a target. So here's the plan, Sylvie continued, her tone chillingly efficient. You're going to drive, your car. We'll be right behind you in hours. You take us home. You give us anything worth taking. Any detours, any signals, any bright ideas. She nodded towards the gun, still unwavering in Corbin's grip. Well, consequences follow. My mind scrambled, a frantic search for an exit, a loophole. But the gun, the isolation, the sheer predatory confidence of them, I was trapped. For now. They escorted me back to my car, the cold pressure of the barrel, a constant reminder against my spine. As I slid behind the wheel, Sylvie leaned in, her breath ghosting my ear. Remember, eyes in your mirror, always. I nodded, a numb gesture. My hands trembled violently as I turned the ignition key. Pulling back onto the desolate highway, their headlights instantly appeared. In my rearview mirror, twin predatory eyes tracking my every move. The drive became a stretched wire of terror. Each passing vehicle ignited a brief, desperate flare of hope, only to be snuffed out as they sped past, oblivious. Thoughts of swerving, of crashing, of creating any kind of diversion flickered, but the image of the gun, the finality it promised, kept my hands steady on the wheel. Approaching my own quiet street, the familiar landmarks twisted into menacing shapes. A desperate gamble began to crystallize. High risk, potentially fatal, but the only sliver of agency left. I turned onto my road, the engine noise suddenly deafening in the pre-dawn stillness. As I swung into my driveway, a small miracle. Mr. Eris Thorne, my elderly neighbor, an inveterate insomniac, was out walking Brutus, his hulking German shepherd, even in the persistent drizzle. Perhaps tonight, his sleeplessness would be my deliverance. I killed the engine, deliberately leaving my door ajar as I stepped out. Their truck pulled in behind. Corbin emerged, gun held low but purposefully. "Evening, Alara," Mr. Thorne called out, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. He waved, amiable, oblivious. "Keeping late hours, aren't you?" Now, my lungs filled, a single shuddering intake of damp air. "Help!" The scream tore from my throat, raw and piercing. "He has a gun!" Chaos erupted, a guttural curse from Corbin, the glint of the gun rising. But before thought could translate to action, 100 pounds of canine fury launched itself from the gloom. Brutus, usually a gentle giant, became a blur of protective instinct slamming into Corbin's legs. The gun discharged, a deafening crack that shattered the suburban peace, but the shot went wild, embedding itself harmlessly in the wet lawn. I saw Sylvie scrambling back towards their truck, naked panic etched on her face. Mr. Thorne was already shouting into his phone. No time to watch the endgame. I bolted for my front door, keys rattling in my shaking hand, fumbling desperately with the lock. Inside, finally. The door slammed shut, the deadbolt thrown. I sagged against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor, the adrenaline abruptly draining away, leaving me hollowed out, trembling uncontrollably. The following hours dissolved into a fractured montage, flashing blue and red lights painting the wet street, uniforms, clipped questions, the careful recitation of terror. Corbin, pinned by a surprisingly tenacious Mr. Thorne and a very determined Brutus, hadn't gotten far. Sylvie was apprehended trying to peel away in their truck. Both were secured, removed from my world. Dawn broke reluctant and gray, filtering through the lingering rain clouds. I sat on my porch steps, wrapped in a scratchy blanket, a mug of cold coffee forgotten in my hands. The police were gone. Silence reclaimed the street, but it felt different now, thin and fragile. The world itself seemed shaded darker, its edges sharper, more menacing. My belief in the simple goodness of stopping for a stranger lay shattered, replaced by a cold knot of suspicion. The knowledge that next time I would hesitate, perhaps drive on. That thought brought a wave of quiet fury and profound sadness. Fury at them for twisting kindness into vulnerability. Yet, as the sun finally pierced the clouds, painting a transient, improbable rainbow across the bruised sky, a quiet resolve began to form. They wouldn't win. They wouldn't fundamentally alter the core of who I was. Helping was not just my profession, it was my nature. Fear would now be a passenger, yes, a cautious hand on the tiller, but it would not steer the ship. I stood, muscles screaming in protest. As I turned towards the door, Mr. Thorne ambled back down the sidewalk, Brutus trotting contentedly beside him. He offered a small, understanding smile, raising a hand in quiet solidarity. And in that simple gesture, clarity. Yes, darkness existed. People like Sylvie and Corbin walked among us, exploiting trust. But so did people like Eris Thorne, quiet heroes emerging from the everyday. For every shadow, there were countless points of light, individuals willing to stand against the encroaching dark. Waving back, I felt a measure of the night's crushing weight lift. Shaken, yes. Scarred, undoubtedly, but not broken. I was still here. And as long as the Mr. Thornes of the world existed, kindness, however battered, would endure. The path forward felt uncertain, shadowed by the memory, but I would walk it. One cautious step, one deliberate act of care at a time. Perhaps my fractured faith could be mended, piece by painful piece. Perhaps this story, my story, could remind others that even when fear whispers loudest, the choice to illuminate the path remains ours. It is not the darkness that defines us, but the light we choose to share. That afternoon clings to memory, less by sight than by the peculiar weight of the air against my skin, an oppressive charge, thick with unspoken static. I, Elias Thorne, navigated the fractured ribbon of an old highway, dispatched by my firm toward some provincial client meeting that held little interest for me. Miles from the city's thrum, the road stretched largely vacant, its asphalt scarred. its yellow lines faded into pale suggestions. Windows barely cracked. I permitted only a sliver of the cool breeze, anticipating nothing beyond tedious obligation. A routine transit, I'd assumed that morning, an assumption shattered in a heartbeat. The first anomaly manifested near a curve, where the wind abruptly intensified. Dry leaves skittered across the tarmac, their rustling a sibilant intrusion. Then distance resolved into a swirling vortex of ochre dust, spinning fiercely but fixed in place, a localized tempest refusing passage. It wasn't mere wind, it possessed structure, the uncanny geometry of a barrier woven from air and debris. A knot tightened in my chest as I registered its unnatural stillness. Instinctively, my speed bled away. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, breath held captive in my lungs. Unlike common gusts, this cyclone didn't drift. It commanded the center of my lane. A glance at the dashboard clock confirmed my tardiness. Duty warred with a primal urge to halt, a gut feeling screaming caution. Yet the meeting beckoned. Tentatively, I eased my foot onto the accelerator, approaching the churning mass, clinging to the hope it might simply unravel. The instant my car's nose breached the dust veil, a profound shudder resonated through the chassis. Not a violent jolt, but a deep internal tremor. Simultaneously, the radio dissolved into raw static. The pop tune vanished, supplanted by a crackling deluge, a chaotic overlay of distorted whispers and high, keening hums. Meaningless syllables bled together, yet possessed a chilling rhythm, the cadence of a hushed, collective incantation. My skin crawled. My throat constricted. Beads of sweat gathered on my brow. The vehicle trembled anew, a subtle vibration traveling up the steering column into my arms. My heart hammered against my ribs. My foot found the brake pressing harder now. Dust and leaves spat against the windshield. A light, insistent drumming. Then, abruptly, the swirling barricade was behind me. Calm air reclaimed the space, but the radio persisted in its alien broadcast. Unable to bear the noise, I stabbed the power button, silencing it. Drawing ragged breaths, I checked the rearview mirror. The dust devil remained, undiminished, spinning relentlessly on the tarmac I'd just crossed. My mind scrambled for explanations. A freak atmospheric quirk? Some localized wind shear? But that didn't account for the voices embedded in the static. A sound that had struck a chord of visceral dread deep within me, feeling disturbingly personal, as if directed solely at me. At the next meager shoulder, I signaled, pulling onto the gravel verge, my hands refusing to steady. Hazard lights pulsed rhythmically. I sat for a long moment, forcing air in and out, striving for composure. A phantom tickle persisted at the nape of my neck, the ghostly echo of those whispers clinging even in the radio's silence. I pushed the driver's door open and stepped out onto unsteady legs, my chest tight. The sun, descending behind a phalanx of trees, cast elongated shadows that sliced across the asphalt. My gaze snapped back to the phenomenon. It hadn't shifted. It continued its dervish dance, twisting earth and foliage into a miniature tornado mid-road. A faint susurrus echoed not in the air but inside my skull, like static reverberating within bone, making my ears ring. Habit made me pop the hood, scanning the engine bay for damage from the vibration. All appeared normal, offering no solace. My pulse throbbed so violently, I felt it behind my eyes. A fresh breeze stirred the trees, swirling dust around my shoes. I slammed the hood shut, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. Then, a flicker of movement at the periphery of my vision. Slowly, deliberately, I turned. There, standing within the very heart of the whirlwind, was a figure, tall, attenuated, its form obscured by the roiling screen of dust. My scalp prickled, my stomach plummeted. It resembled a human shape cloaked in dark attire, yet details remained elusive, blurred by the ceaseless motion. Leaves and grit spun around it as it stood, utterly still, facing me. No face was discernible, but the intensity of its unseen gaze was palpable, raising every hair on my body. I scanned the tree lines flanking the road. Empty. No other vehicles approached. I was utterly alone with this presence. My mouth was arid, swallowing felt impossible. My hands shook. My feet seemed rooted to the gravel. The swirling wind intensified, its whoosh escalating around the figure. Then, as suddenly as it had materialized, the shape turned and glided towards the trees. It didn't walk. It seemed to dissolve into the deepening shadows. The vortex persisted for another beat, then collapsed instantaneously, its captive leaves fluttering limply to the ground. I coughed, the airborne dust catching in my throat, and took a hesitant step forward, eyes straining to pierce the gloom among the trees. The distant crackle of breaking branches reached me, but the woods yielded no sign of the figure. My heart hammered. Fists clenched, I felt torn between frantic retreat and a morbid curiosity pulling me towards where it had vanished. Forcing myself into motion, I circled the car, inspecting the passenger side, checking tires, paintwork. The whirlwind had left no physical mark, yet the feeling of being watched, scrutinized from the woods, was undeniable. A pressure built in my chest, panic fluttering at the edges of my breath. The sun dipped lower, bleeding orange across the sky. Remaining here much longer meant being swallowed by darkness on this desolate stretch. The thought soured my stomach. I'd never leaned toward superstition, but the disembodied radio voices and the dust-shrouded apparition had profoundly unnerved me. Safety felt like a distant shore. My body remained coiled, muscles taut, ears straining against the quiet. I scrambled back into the car, slamming the door, thumbing the lock immediately. I turned the key, half bracing for failure, but the engine caught with a familiar hum. Relief washed over me, fleetingly. Then the radio clicked on, unbidden. The volume was low, yet the static seeped back, those distorted, sibilant whispers. My hand trembled on the gear shift. I jabbed the power button again, harder this time. The static persisted, a faint leakage, seemingly emanating from behind the dashboard itself. A brief hiss, then something almost resembling a garbled human word surfaced for an instant before dissolving back into noise. Sweat traced a path down my temple. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed wide, haunted eyes, shallow breaths. I fumbled for my phone. No signal. Predictable on this forsaken road, but the confirmation still jangled my nerves. Shoving the phone away, I gritted my teeth, mashing the radio's power button repeatedly. Eventually, the static subsided into a strained silence, though whether it was truly gone or merely lurking felt uncertain. Shifting into drive, I pulled pulled back onto the highway, forcing my gaze forward, deliberately avoiding the mirror. My heart galloped. My foot felt leaden on the accelerator. A sideways glance at the shoulder where I'd stopped revealed nothing but empty gravel and a few scattered leaves. The swirl had vanished. The road ahead looked deceptively peaceful. Miles unspooled beneath my tires, each one marked by the insistent thrumming at my temples. I switched on the air conditioning, hoping to dispel the car's stale, anxious atmosphere. My throat felt raw, my skin clammy. Calm remained elusive, but I focused on keeping my hands steady on the wheel. Occasional faint crackles from the speakers made me flinch, muscles tensing, but the full static assault didn't resume. A green sign promised the next town lay 10 miles ahead. I resolved to stop at the first sign of civilization, a gas station, anything. I needed a moment, needed cold water on my face, needed to try and convince myself I hadn't hallucinated. But the conviction remained. The figure was real. Its stare through the dust was imprinted on my mind, felt deep in my bones. Eventually, a skeletal filling station emerged on the right, its sign flickering erratically, the place exuding an air of near abandonment. It was my only option. I pulled in beside a rust-streaked pump beneath a single sputtering overhead lamp that cast a sickly glow on the cracked concrete. Turning off the ignition, I listened intently. Silence held. I exhaled slowly. Stepping out, the air smelled of gasoline and old oil. A small store was attached, its grimy window plastered with faded flyers, the door handle broken. Inside, a cramped counter faced a lone clerk, Gus, whose boredom seemed palpable. I offered only a curt nod, grabbing bottled water from a cooler. As I paid, he mumbled, "Headin' south?" I confirmed, then risked asking if he'd seen anything unusual on the highway. He offered a shrug that dismissed worlds, his gaze sliding past me. "Nah," he drawled. "Wind kicks up dust sometimes. Locals got stories about haunts, but I ain't seen nothing." He returned to his magazine. I didn't press further, just uncapped the water and drank deeply, the coolness soothing my parched throat. Back outside, I leaned against the car for a moment. The sky had deepened to a bruised orange. The evening chill was palpable. My mind replayed the encounter, the figure materializing within the vortex. My knees felt weak, tremulous, as if after strenuous exertion. Pressing a palm to my forehead, I felt my own feverish heat. Lingering felt wrong. I needed to reach the town proper before full nightfall. The final stretch of highway passed under a tightening knot of tension, yet remained uneventful. The radio stayed blessedly mute. The wind was calm. The asphalt transitioned between smooth patches and jarring cracks, each tire thump making me jump. My mirror checks became compulsive, scanning the empty road behind me. Finally, the scattered lights of the small town appeared, a welcome sight. Driving under the relative brightness of street lamps, past darkened houses felt like surfacing. I pulled into the motel parking lot, killed the engine, the silence profound. My shoulders ached from the sustained tension of my grip on the wheel. Retrieving my suitcase, I slammed the car door, locking it swiftly, my eyes darting around the shadowed corners of the lot, half expecting another swirling manifestation, another silent watcher. Inside the sterile room, I flipped on the light, dropping my bag onto the bed. Thin walls transmitted the muffled sounds of a television next door. I noticed my hands were still shaking, fumbling slightly. Leaning against the small desk by the window, I took several deliberate breaths, attempting to anchor myself. "It's over," I told myself, but the assertion felt hollow. The figure, the static voices whispering from nowhere, these couldn't be simply dismissed. The memory of the dust swirl was a burr under my skin. Relief remained elusive, replaced by a pervasive sense that something had latched onto me, followed me, unseen. My skin prickled with the phantom sensation of its stare. I found myself repeatedly drawn to the window, peering into the darkness, waiting. Sleep offered little refuge that night. My mind looped relentlessly through the afternoon's events. The impossible vortex, the car's sympathetic tremor, the radio's spectral transmission. Every detail felt seared into my consciousness, a stark reminder that something on that lonely highway had singled me out. Within the flimsy security of the motel walls, the uneasy certainty grew. My encounter hadn't been mere happenstance. It felt like a threshold crossed, a door pushed open into somewhere unfamiliar and unsettling, and I possessed no knowledge of how to close it again. Phantoms were fodder for fiction I'd always maintained. Specters belonging to brittle pages and flickering screens, not to the solid world I inhabited. Until the Hotel Viridian, it loomed, less a lodging house and more a monument to expired opulence, a grande dame sinking gracefully into her dotage. Snagged on a whim for a business detour, its siren song was a low rate and a pin dropped conveniently on the map. The edifice possessed a weary majesty, its tall windows like vacant eyes, the carpet sighing threads-bare stories of departed decades. Quaint, perhaps, serviceable for a single rotation of the clock. What wasn't advertised was the 2 a.m. appointment with an ossified silhouette in the adjacent window, its gaze locked unnervingly onto mine. Check-in had been a muted affair. The lobby, cavernous and hushed, held only a spectral receptionist, Ms. Albright, whose fatigue seemed etched into the very plaster. She'd slid the brass key, room 313, terminus of the East Wing corridor, across the counter with an air of profound indifference. I navigated the shadowed hallway, my valise a percussive counterpoint to the muffled groan of floorboards beneath the desiccated runner. The air hung thick, a cloying perfume of lemon oil, dust, and the faint funereal scent of time itself. My room, 313, offered little distraction. A bed draped in a chenille shroud, a scarred escritoire, a window framing the indifferent streetlights below. Wallpaper curled at the seams like ancient parchment, the furniture relics of some forgotten design era. Yet it possessed a certain sterile tidiness. Following a solitary meal in the echoing refectory downstairs, all I craved was ablution and oblivion. Later, stretched beneath the high, crazed ceiling, I traced the fractures like constellations, listening to the city's distant susurrus. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, a held breath that made every settling groan of the building resonate like a footfall. That's when the luminescence registered. Not a glare, but an ethereal seepage from the window adjoining mine, glimpsed past the edge of my own heavy drapes. Initially dismissed, a forgotten lamp, a television's pallor, its utter stillness began to prickle. No flicker, no variance. just a steady, anemic radiance hovering behind the glass. Cold and constant. Paranoia, I chided myself. Old structures breathe strange airs. I burrowed deeper under the covers, seeking refuge in forced slumber. Sleep, when it came, was shallow. What shattered it wasn't loud, but insidious. A delicate tick-tick-ticking, almost subliminal beneath the air conditioner's drone. Yet it persisted, swelling slightly. Tick, 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 measured, precise, like fingernails drumming lightly on glass. My eyes flew open, pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I lay rigid, ears straining against the manufactured silence. The tapping continued, unhurried, before ceasing abruptly. A soft scree followed, the sound of aged timber complaining under weight. Breath held captive in my lungs, every nerve ending alight. I listened. Then absolute stillness returned. Pushing myself upright, the blood roared in my ears. The room swam in darkness, punctuated only by the city glow beyond my window and that persistent, weak light next door. Had I dreamt the tapping, the groaning floor, surely the old hotel's nocturnal symphony? But then my gaze fixed on the adjacent window, and the shape took form. At first, a mere density in the dimness, a trick of shadow and reflection, but as my vision sharpened, the outline solidified, unmistakably human, a silhouette stark against the faint interior glow, utterly motionless in the window frame, angled directly towards me. A visceral lurch seized my chest. It didn't shift, didn't breathe, didn't betray any sign of life save for its unnerving presence. It simply watched, waiting, it seemed, for this precise moment of discovery. My fingers scrabbled for the phone on the nightstand, slick with a sudden cold perspiration. Logic warred with primal fear. No one stands so perfectly still. No one stares with such vacant intensity into a stranger's window in the dead of night. I stared back, transfixed, skin crawling. The urge to investigate, to fling open my door and confront the impossible, was countered by a powerful, instinctual command. Stay hidden. Yet my eyes remained locked on the shape, desperately seeking a rational explanation that refused to materialize. Then, with excruciating slowness, it moved. Not abruptly, but with a fluid, unhurried turn away from the glass, melting back into the unlit depths of the room beyond. The faint light behind it pulsed once, weakly, and then extinguished. Total blackness claimed the window. I remained frozen, breath shallow, heart frantic. Explanations flickered, a prankster guest, a confused occupant, but conviction settled cold and heavy in my gut. This was no simple mistake. Sleep was a lost cause. I lay taut in the darkness, cataloging every creak, every distant rumble from the plumbing, every sigh of the ancient building, expecting the silhouette's return. Each sound ratcheted the tension, but the neighboring window remained a void. Dawn couldn't break fast enough. The first hesitant fingers of light were my cue. I threw my belongings into the valise with frantic haste. Another night in this room was unthinkable. Descending towards the lobby, I found myself pausing before the door of 312, the source of the night's terror. Compelled by a morbid curiosity, I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Utter, profound silence. No hint of occupancy. A hesitant rap of my knuckles yielded nothing but the same heavy stillness. In the lobby, Ms. Albright presided over her counter with the same weary detachment. "Excuse me," I began, keeping my voice level. "Was anyone staying in the room next to mine, 312? She consulted her screen, a flicker of puzzlement crossing her features. "Room 312? She echoed, her tone flat. "That room's been flagged for maintenance. Pipe issue. It's been unoccupied for nearly a month." A chill, distinct and sharp, traced its way down my spine. "Are you certain?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. She nodded, her gaze drifting back to her monitor, mildly perplexed by my insistence. "Positive? It's empty? Why? Noise complaint?" I swallowed against the sudden dryness in my throat. The figure, the insistent light, the tapping. Phantom events in an empty room. I offered no explanation, just a mumbled thanks before gathering my things and fleeing the Viridian's suffocating embrace. The drive back was haunted by the image. That static figure framed in the window, its silent regard boring into me. What vigil had I interrupted? Was it merely exhaustion painting specters onto glass? Or had I truly brushed against something anchored to that hotel, something far older and more patient than any transient guest? I possess no answers, only the chilling certainty that the Hotel Viridian holds secrets I have no desire to uncover further. I have never returned. It manifested again that Thursday, deep in the evening's grain. My shoes barely shed, spine still aching from wrestling the office's derelict copier. I glimpsed it, a tremor of silhouette in my bedroom window pane, faint, ephemeral, like condensation from a phantom breath. I blinked, rubbed tired eyes, and then perceived it fully. Not my own weary reflection, not the sodium glare of streetlights, but another place entirely shimmered beyond the glass. A stranger's room, steeped in low, flickering light, and occupied. Rooted to the threshold, one foot still sunk in the hallway's threadbare carpet, I froze. The chamber beyond the pane whispered of age, perhaps the dawn of the last century. A ponderous table squatted on carved lion paws. Nearby, an armchair stood sentinel-like in deep green velvet, its back ramrod straight. The wallpaper, a forgotten floral pattern bruised with umber stains, peeled subtly at the corners. Illumination bled weakly from an unseen source, candle flame or antique lamp, throwing tremulous shadows that writhed and deepened. Within these shifting umbras stood figures, or what passed for them, vague humanoid forms, impossibly still, like figures trapped in amber or old paint. 3, possibly more, their edges blurred, viewed as if through water or gauze. My throat constricted, dry as parchment. Hesitation warred with a morbid pull. I edged closer. The shapes remained static, yet expectant. Their faces were lost to shadow or distance, but something felt intrinsically wrong about their outlines. Their postures defied anatomy, a tilted head here, a shoulder unnaturally slumped there. My hand, acting on instinct, reached for the window latch, testing its freedom, locked, not merely locked but seized, as if fused to the frame. My fingers curled, pulled, solid resistance, again harder, straining, immovable. "Yield," I breathed, the sound swallowed by the room's sudden density. 2 months I'd inhabited this space, lured by its cheapness, its quietude. Worn, yes, but convenient. Never had this window given trouble. Now it felt welded shut, Pressing my forehead to the cool glass, my own breath bloomed white, obscuring the scene momentarily. In that instant of fog, did a silhouette twitch? I recoiled, stumbling against the nightstand. Exhaustion, I reasoned. Late hours sorting through dusty archives, the cursed copier. Stress conjures demons. Yet even as the thought formed, an icy tendril traced its path down my spine. The air thickened, cloying, tasting of disturbed earth and damp. I snapped on the overhead light. Its glare did nothing. My reflection remained absent, usurped by that spectral room and its silent occupants. Light off, no change. They persisted. This wasn't a play of shadows cast by my own lamp. The rest of the evening became an exercise in avoidance. I gnawed a cold sandwich in the kitchen, nursed a cheap beer, deliberately keeping my back to the hallway. A knot tightened in my gut. Sweat beaded on my brow despite the chill. The house's silence pressed in, profound. No television droned, no radio whispered. My own swallowing echoed unnaturally loud. Calling someone felt futile. It was late, and the story sounded like lunacy. Leo? Yeah, hi. My bedroom window's a portal to somewhere else. Derision, or worse, concern for my sanity would follow. Eventually, a fragile courage propelled me back. The tableau held unchanged. The figures lingered in their corners, veiled in shadow. Drawing near again, cautiously, I noticed details previously obscured. One shape, taller than the others, seemed adorned with gloves of delicate black lace, stretching over unnervingly thin arms. Another's face was shrouded by a veil so diaphanous I imagined hollow sockets staring from behind it. A tremor ran through me. I braced myself against the wall. Another test. I tapped the glass softly. Silence answered. Leaning closer, my heartbeat drumming in my ears, I strained to listen. And then, or did I imagine it, a faint rustle from their side, the whisper of fabric shifting. I retreated hastily, scrambling into bed, pulling the covers to my chin. Sleep came fitfully that night, pierced by the glare of the lamp I left burning. Morning bleached the window back to mundane reality. My own face stared back, framed by limp curtains and the pale intrusion of dawn. Relief brought a short, sharp laugh. A dream, hypnagogic hallucination. I dressed for work, pushing the memory aside, until my gaze fell upon something near the window. A thin scrap of antique paper, sere and yellowed with age. Picking it up, I saw it was blank, save for the ghost of a floral watermark bled through its fibers. It hadn't come from me. I owned nothing like it. I shoved it into a drawer and fled the apartment. Throughout the workday, concentration fractured. The veiled figures swam at the edge of my vision. That night, returning home felt like wading through dread. Muscles clenched, eyes gritty with fatigue. I entered the bedroom holding my breath. Normalcy greeted me, at first, blessed, fragile normalcy. But as I kicked off my shoes, advancing towards it, the glass began to dim, my reflection dissolving as if submerged in murky water. Seconds later, the antiquated room flickered back into existence. My chest seized. Tonight, they were clearer, closer, not dramatically so, but enough. Enough to discern the faint floral tracery on one figure's gown, lace, intricately worked. Enough to see the veil on another thin further, revealing a mouth slightly agape, a dark O seeming to drink the very air. Raw frustration tore through me. "What do you want?" I yelled, my voice cracking, the words hitting the glass like stones against steel, falling dead. Silence, motionlessness. My heart hammered against my ribs. Again I wrestled the latch, fingers slick with sweat, yanking until my muscles screamed. Futile. I dragged a chair over, wedging its back beneath the handle, a nonsensical gesture of defiance. Then, snatching an old quilt from the closet, I began taping it over the window, obscuring the view pane by pane. Out of sight. But the knowledge remained, a festering splinter in the mind. That night, beneath the muffled quilt, the sounds returned. The softest rustle, the possible creak of aged floorboards from beyond the glass. Sleep refused me. I lay rigid, pulse throbbing in my temples, imagining their silent vigil on the other side. Saturday brought a desperate resolve. I retrieved an old claw hammer from the kitchen toolkit. Standing before the shrouded window, I ripped the quilt away. The hammer felt heavy, purposeful, but the sight arrested my arm mid-swing. They were closer still. One stood directly behind the glass now, so near I could almost resolve the eyes behind the veil. Dark, steady pools that seemed fixed on mine. The lace-gloved hand rested lightly against the inner surface, perhaps against their side of the pane. My own hand trembled violently, the hammer suddenly unwieldy. A primal revulsion seized me. The thought of shattering that barrier felt like unleashing something irrevocable. What if breaking the glass didn't just break glass? What if it broke the thin wall between worlds? That was the core of the terror, wasn't it? An illogical, gut-deep certainty. Opening this window, violating its integrity, would invite them across. They wouldn't simply enter, they would merge, altering the very fabric of my reality, contaminating my solitude. They didn't crave my life, but my peace. Their aim was to tether me here, perpetually caught between my drab, rented room and their dust-choked parlor, ensuring tranquility remained forever beyond my grasp. The following days blurred into a cycle of failed denial. I draped towels, sheets, heavier blankets over the window, each layer insufficient to erase the certainty of their presence. Random sweats plagued me. My palms grew damp the moment I crossed the bedroom threshold. I tried the living room couch, but sleep there was fractured by phantom noises. Footsteps whispering within the walls. I'd wake gasping, the taste of copper on my tongue, heart rattling like a trapped bird. My call to the landlord went to voicemail, a frantic, rambling message about a stuck window. I mentioned nightmares to Leo at work. He shrugged, advised finding a new place. Leaving felt both necessary and impossible. The deposit was forfeit, a significant blow. More than that, abandoning the window felt like leaving a part of myself connected to it, a fear that flight would only ensure they followed. Don't ask for logic, it was bone-deep knowledge. By the fifth night of this siege, they were so close I could smell it. A scent seeped through the glass, improbable yet undeniable. Cloying floral notes tangled with the sour breath of decay. My stomach revolted. I gagged, pressing my sleeve to my face. The figures nearly filled the frame now. The lace-gloved hands rested flat against my side of the pane, the faint blue tracery of veins visible beneath the thin, pale skin. One figure, the nearest, slowly, deliberately tilted its head. A gasp tore from my throat. I stumbled back. They could move. They could move. Cold sweat drenched me. My legs buckled. Dizziness washed over me in waves. Action, any action, was imperative. stop them closing the final inches. I seized the quilt, the tape, sealing the window with frantic energy, layer upon layer until no glass remained visible. My heart pounded, a frantic drum against silence, a pathetic defense I knew, but the only one I possessed. I shoved my dresser against the window, piling books atop it, a physical barricade against the metaphysical. Slumped by the door, breath tearing through me, throat raw, I listened. Absolute silence descended, then, faint, insidious, the scratch of lace against glass, like fingernails drawn across a mirror's surface. My body went rigid. I clamped my hands over my ears, a useless gesture. The sound resonated inside my skull. They wouldn't leave. This much was certain. Yet they didn't force entry, didn't shatter the glass. They merely lingered, patient, watchful. And I waited too, trapped in this silent, suffocating standoff. Morning arrived, and with it, silence. Heart pounding a heavy rhythm of dread, I pushed aside the dresser, tore down the quilt. The window was normal. My reflection stared back from beneath an overcast sky. Relief warred with a deeper unease churning my stomach. I looked paler, thinner. My eyes seemed sunken, bruised by sleeplessness. Leaning closer, scrutinizing my own image, I saw it, a flicker, instantaneous behind my reflection. Something pale, veiled, standing just over my shoulder. I spun around, empty room. I tried to dismiss it, but the sensation clung like cobwebs. When I reached out, touching the glass, my fingertips seemed to sink, just fractionally, as if the surface had yielded, become porous. I snatched my hand back. No visible change, yet the feeling lingered, undeniable. I haven't left. Not yet. Perhaps I will. But tonight I remain, attuned to every floorboard creak, every sigh of wind. The window holds my reflection for now, but its stability feels illusory. Closing my eyes brings their silhouettes burned onto my retinas. Swallowing evokes the taste of dust and fetid perfume. I find myself constantly checking my reflection, seeking reassurance of my own solidity, my own self. And each time, a sliver of fear suggests another presence lurking just behind my shoulder, a faint shape, waiting. They didn't need violence. They only needed to reveal the other side of the glass. I feel the membrane between here and there thinning, growing fragile. One day soon, perhaps without warning, my eyes will open to find that other room permanently superimposed on mine. Perhaps they'll already be inside, having slipped through without breaking a latch or uttering a sound, quietly, irrevocably siphoning away my peace, leaving me stranded between two realities I can barely comprehend. A tremor runs through me. Perhaps I am already lost somewhere between the glass. The precise moment awareness bloomed is seared into my recollection. Deep in the night's embrace, bathed in the glow of the monitor, I was navigating the labyrinth of images captured earlier. My focus snagged hard on an ephemeral shape nestled in the corner of one frame. It resolved into the suggestion of a woman, swathed in white, lingering in the deeper shadows. A mere bystander, I first reasoned, overlooked during the intensity of the shoot, but her posture arrested me. She was oriented towards my lens, towards me. An unsettling vibration began low in my gut, the distinct frequency of being observed in anonymity. My name is Silas Thorne. I traffic in the ghosts of architecture, a freelance photographer drawn to the skeletal remains of history. time-worn towns, echoing cathedrals, forsaken cloisters, any edifice whispering tales of age and atmosphere. Fear isn't a familiar companion. My vocation leads me down shadowed corridors, past rusted gates, accompanied only by the lonely percussion of my own steps, in desolate ruins. Yet that night, magnifying the image, straining to clarify that distant form, an instinctive alarm shrilled within me. Her features remained indistinct, a blur of pixels, but I could almost feel the weight of her gaze piercing the screen. I forced the unease down, scrolling onward. A short while later, I encountered a second exposure from a subtly shifted angle of the same structure. She reappeared, displaced now to the frame's far left margin, still clad in white, though only the silhouette of her shoulder and a fall of dark hair were visible. Utterly illogical. These photographs were taken mere heartbeats apart. No living soul had drifted through my field of view. The following day found me back at the site, an ancient convent, its high walls encircling a courtyard, worn smooth by forgotten feet. Seeking the clarity of midday sun, I arrived near noon. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional sigh of wind stirring dust motes. Tripod deployed, I began capturing the rhythm of arches flanking the courtyard. A faint pressure built in my chest, a formless anxiety tightening its grip. I tried to shrug it off as fatigue or imagination. Later, back in my studio, I scanned the new collection. Initially, nothing untoward. Then, towards the sequence's end, she materialized again. I leaned closer, my breath catching. There she stood, partially obscured by a weathered column. I froze. Respiration grew shallow. I rubbed my eyes, blinked, looked again. This transcended coincidence. She was undeniably present, the same white garment flowing around her, and perceptibly nearer this time, as if she'd stolen a few quiet paces towards my position. A clammy dampness slicked my palms. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm. Rationalizations surfaced. A local eccentric, a curious visitor. But they crumbled against the fact of my own observation. I pride myself on meticulous framing, on noticing intrusions. I hadn't seen her, not once. Sleep offered little refuge that night. Tossing, turning, my mind replayed the spectral appearances. I resolved to conduct a meticulous audit the next day, image by image, hunting for a pattern, a glitch, some mundane explanation, a reflection, lens flare, anything. Morning arrived, gray and subdued. I launched my editing software, delving into the recent archives. The tally grew. 6 photographs now bore her silent witness. Each instance placed her differently, sometimes veiled by architecture, sometimes starker against the backdrop, but always, incrementally, closer to the point from which I'd captured the scene. Details began to emerge. The dress possessed a vintage quality, loose-sleeved, falling to her ankles. Her hair was a dark cascade, ebony or deep umber, though her face remained stubbornly elusive. Subsequent days brought other assignments, whisking me through nearby villages. One commission involved an antiquated library, heavy with the scent of decaying paper. Another, a small parish church, its interior fractured by light bleeding through stained glass. A nervous energy thrummed beneath my skin. I found myself constantly scanning peripheries, glancing over my shoulder, anticipating her presence. Focusing became an act of will, my senses perpetually keyed up, searching alcoves and doorways. Yet, in the tangible world, nothing. No suspicious figures shadowed me, No one approached, but each evening the ritual repeated. Upload the day's work, and there she would be. Invariable white, always lurking somewhere within the frame, relentlessly closing the distance, behind a row of solemn pews, leaning against a cold stone wall, once chillingly near a narrow portal opening onto a stairwell. She stood halfway up, gazing down towards my perspective. A frigid wave washed over me. I could almost feel the ghost of her breath. My apartment door began to feel insufficient. Double-checking the locks became routine. It sounds absurd, I know, but I took to peering through the peephole before venturing out. My own shadow seemed suspect in the hallway. I confided in no one. How could I articulate this? They'd assume delusion or fabrication. There existed no logical framework for the persistent manifestation of the same woman in disparate locations, places unconnected to her or each other. A commission arrived. Document an old fortress guarding the city's edge, encircled by a dry moat and formidable stone ramparts. I arrived mid-afternoon, chasing the slanted golden light ideal for revealing texture. I forced myself into the familiar rhythm. Outer walls, the imposing gate, segments of the vast courtyard. The site was nearly deserted, save for a scattering of tourists preoccupied with selfies. Suddenly, a potent wave of disquiet crested over me. My shoulders clenched. A faint noise, grit crunching underfoot. I spun around, heart seizing. Empty space greeted me. A ragged breath escaped my lips. Back to work. Hours later, packing my gear, a tremor lingered in my hands, gripping the steering wheel. My legs felt brittle, braced for an impact that never came. Inside my apartment, the door bolted behind me. I dropped my keys, shed my camera bag, and sank into the chair before my computer. A conflicting urge warred within me. The need to know tangled with the dread of discovery. I initiated the import. The first 30 or so images were clean. A fragile tendon of relief loosened in my chest. Perhaps this time. Then image 31. I leaned forward, nausea churning. She stood near a deep-set doorway in the fortress wall, half concealed but starkly defined. Subsequent shots revealed her within the courtyard, framed by a wide arch. In the final photograph of the sequence, she occupied the foreground, still yards away, yet undeniably, terrifyingly closer than ever before. Something constricted within my ribs. My breathing grew rapid, shallow. My fingers trembled on the mouse. Thoughts of abandoning photography, changing specialties flickered wildly. But this craft is my lifeblood, the only path I've known. This had to be an elaborate, inexplicable prank, I told myself. Yet the logistics, the sheer impossibility across varied, often secured locations, defied reason. The following days blurred into a self-imposed confinement. I stayed indoors, scouring the digital ether for whispers of a woman in white haunting historical sites. Silence. Local forums yielded nothing. Vague inquiries. Anyone notice a figure in white near old ruins? Met with digital shrugs. Finally, after restless days pacing my living room, I accepted another assignment. A small historical society needed interior shots of an old bell tower dominating the town center. The fee was necessary, and a sliver of desperate hope ignited. Perhaps here, in this confined space, I might finally see her with my own eyes, confront her, understand the mechanics of this haunting. The tower loomed, perhaps 90 feet of narrow, winding ascent. The air inside was heavy, thick with the aroma of damp stone and corroded metal. Each footstep echoed, amplified in the enclosed shaft. Pigeons fluttered somewhere in the gloom above. Near the base, camera aimed up the spiraling staircase towards the massive bell. I began shooting, adjusting the flash against the pervasive dimness. The shutter's crisp click ricocheted off the curved walls. My own breath sounded unnaturally loud. After several minutes, I moved to the next landing, capturing the texture of the aged masonry. Dust and mildew tickled my throat, provoking small coughs. Somewhere between the second and third landings, a sudden piercing cold descended. I froze, holding my breath, straining my ears against the oppressive quiet. My skin prickled as if charged with static. Then, a whisper of sound from above, a soft tap like a shoe sole meeting stone. My heart slammed against my sternum. I angled my flashlight beam upward into the helical dark. Nothing visible, yet I retained a fleeting afterimage, a flicker of white disappearing around the next bend. Adrenaline flooded my system, weakening my knees. One instinct screamed retreat. Another darker curiosity propelled me upward, step by laborious step. Muscles bunched, taut. Breath came in ragged gasps. The higher I climbed, the denser the shadows seemed, despite small apertures puncturing the walls. The flashlight beam danced nervously. Reaching the summit, I saw the great, rust-pocked bell suspended overhead. The floor was rough-hewn stone, limited hiding places behind sturdy wooden support beams. Amidst scattered debris, I swept the area with my light. Cobwebs glistened, dead leaves lay brittle. No one. The silence pressed in. I realized sweat soaked my back. After several taut minutes, heart pounding a frantic tattoo, I began the descent, legs shaky on the worn steps. I took a few obligatory wide shots on each landing, completing the job perfunctorily, rushing now. Back home, the review commenced. My mouth was parched, my shirt clinging damply. Click, click, click through the frames. Then, in an image captured near the tower's apex, I found her face, positioned behind me, or rather, behind the camera's vantage point. Half her visage peered from behind a structural beam, staring directly into the lens. She looked appallingly close, perhaps mere feet away. Her eyes registered as dark pools, her skin unnaturally pale under the flash's harsh kiss. I gasped, a physical blow, my heart seeming to stop, then restart with painful force. I had stood precisely there, scanned every inch. She hadn't been visible, yet undeniably there she was. My entire body locked rigid. That night became a siege within my own apartment. Appetite vanished. Water and pacing were my only sustenance. My mind looped endlessly, replaying every encounter, every unsettling detail. Every unexpected noise made me flinch. Passing a mirror prompted a reflexive, fearful glance. The television droned, a bulwark against the silence. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me on the couch, dragging me into fractured sleep, haunted by the echo of footsteps on stone stairs. Morning found me hollowed out, drained. A break from shooting was imperative. Editing backlog demanded attention, but the thought of venturing out, camera in hand, felt impossible. I brewed coffee, settled at my desk, attempted to focus on retouching a client's portraits. But with every file opened, my gaze instinctively darted to the background, scanning for a telltale flicker of white. My pulse would spike, breath hitching. The expectation was constant. Her relentless progression haunted me, closer, ever closer in each successive photograph. The certainty grew, continue shooting, and eventually she would fill the frame. The thought induced a cold sweat. What then? What happens when she finally arrives? Face to face. Would she speak, accuse, simply stare? Was it a harbinger, a warning? Mid-afternoon, the doorbell shrieked. I jolted violently, nearly upsetting my coffee. Heart hammering, I crept to the door, peered through the peephole. A delivery driver. I cracked the door, accepted the package with a mumbled thanks, secured the locks again. My nerves were frayed thin. Even this mundane interaction felt jarring. I noticed my hands were trembling. That evening, I assembled all the images featuring the woman. Arranged chronologically on the monitor, the narrative was undeniable. From a minuscule, almost subliminal speck in the earliest shots, she advanced. Photo by photo, the distance shrank, sometimes by feet, sometimes yards, often partially hidden, yet her trajectory was unwavering. Her face a cipher until the bell tower. There, starkly revealed, her expression was unnervingly focused, studying me. My throat constricted. A desperate urge arose to destroy the hard drive, obliterate the evidence, but my professional archive resided there too. Instead, I meticulously backed everything onto external drives, burying them deep within a drawer. An act of preservation, perhaps. Proof, should my sanity fray completely. The subsequent days were an exercise in forced normality, grocery runs, minimal editing, a brief, hesitant walk around the block, camera deliberately left behind. The thought of taking another picture, inviting her closer, was intolerable. I became hyper-vigilant, scrutinizing every passerby, their clothes, their gaze. No woman in white materialized in the crowds, yet the tension remained. A persistent ache coiled in my neck and shoulders. Yesterday afternoon, a call. A prospective client offering a lucrative assignment. Photograph a restored manor house on the city's fringe. The shoot scheduled weeks away. I requested time to consider. Hanging up, I sank onto the couch, staring at the blank wall, a dull weight pressing on my chest. This tightrope walk feels unsustainable. Continue working, and I continue to summon her, drawing her ever nearer. Stop, and my livelihood evaporates. Who is she? What does she signify? I possess no answers, only the chilling certainty of her presence, her silent pursuit documented frame by frame. She gets closer with every click of the shutter. She never speaks, never overtly interacts, but she is there, and she watches. I cannot fathom its genesis or its purpose. I only know I capture her image, and she follows. What awaits when the distance finally collapses to zero? What will I see when she is finally close enough to touch? That unknown is the deepest terror, and it's closing in.